Welcome to Data Masterclass podcast, where data leaders share their unique stories. In this episode today, we talked with Malcolm Chisholm, who is president of Data Millennium, about the topic, how companies can move from process centricity to data centricity. Let's welcome your hosts, Dr. Alexander Boric and 𝗖𝗄𝗍𝗺𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀😅
Hello, everyone. Hi, hello, data leaders. Welcome back to our podcast. We're gonna dive into the data topic today. So, as you know, we're covering usually a wide range of things that are important for data and AI leaders. Today, we're gonna focus on data management, data governance, and I think there's nobody better to invite than Malcolm, who has been in that space for decades. And I think a lot of you know him. But for those who don't, maybe Malcolm, you could start with giving our audience a bit of an kind of intro into your kind of life's work of data.
Wow.
In a nutshell.
That's very kind of you. Thank you, Alex. So, yes, my name is Malcolm Chisholm. I got interested in data at university because I was doing a PhD that involved, it was ecological field work, involved huge amounts of insect specimens. So I had to catalog them and do population counts. It involved having to use computers because the data was just too overwhelming. So then I moved from that into development. I became a programmer, developer, data engineer, as you call them now. So that was what I did for quite a long time. It was application development. Then I moved into product development, help with certain specialized kinds of financial software based around rules engines, building rules engines. But at the same time, I got interested in data because, we had the database revolution. Data modeling was important for the design of relational databases. And from that into master data management, reference data management, just sort of the strategic aspects of data, and then into data governance itself. So that's kind of my trajectory in terms of my career in a nutshell.
And I mean, since then you've been touring and speaking about data and working with companies to help them fix data.
Yeah.
So what's kind of your, like, the last years, what have you been what have been your key focus areas, in the data management space?
So really in recent years, it's been helping companies set up data governance functions because data governance is new. It's difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand the need for it, difficult to understand what it is. And people, it's a new thing. It's not like, accounting, which has been around for millennia. So it's tough to get it done and get it done right. So it's helping companies and other organizations set up data governance is kind of what I've been doing.
Very cool. And it's a tough beast, huh?
It's quite tough, and it's changing rapidly as well, which is another issue. So keeping up with the rate of change is difficult, but it's necessary.
Yeah. So Malcolm, one of the things you kind of told us is kind of that is a key theme, like and also and I think it matches very well your biography, is that you said like companies and yourself went from process centricity to data centricity.
Yeah, I mean, people, we don't always understand the world we're living in, okay, and how we got to where we are today is through a series of historical processes. So when it comes to data, computing, IT kind of stuff in general, it's rather interesting because if you would go back to the 1950s, you'd find that bookkeeping, for instance, if you went into a bank, you would, withdraw €5, $5. There would be somebody with a big book and a pen who'd write in, handwriting that you had done this in the ledger book. And obviously that worked, again, for millennia, but not it can't scale, and it can't scale because we just don't have enough people to do it. You make mistakes, things like people make mistakes, things like that. So when computers stop being sort of research tools and things used in defense and intelligence, they became more commercially available. That would be starting in 1965 with the IBM Series 3. It was a revolution because now companies could gain access to computing power to automate these clerical bookkeeping things, at least initially. That's what they focused on. And you write a program, you execute the same set of rules over and over and over again. Computers are good at that. They do exactly what you tell them to do, and they will repeat it. Unlike a human being like me, I'll make mistakes. Okay, if I try to do computations repeatedly for the same thing. And also you can scale up. So if you were a bank, maybe you would have to hire a new human being for every 100 customers. I don't know, something like that. You got. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. You've got enough computing power to be able to do it. And the original mainframes were like the cloud of today. You could rent them. You could just rent space on them, just use them as needed. So it was very good for everybody. So there was a problem in that you had the business people in an organization who knew nothing about computers or programming or anything like that. So they had to hire people from outside who did. Those people knew nothing about the business, nor did they want to. They identified more with what we would call the IT industry than the organizations they worked for. So you had this business IT divide right from the start. But anyway, it took off, and it was like a giant gold rush of automating all these hitherto manual processes. So payroll, stock keeping, inventory management, all these clerical kind of things were put into computers, and the focus was on processes. You were an analyst, you talked to a knowledgeable user, you developed a flow diagram of what the manual process was, and then you translated that into computer code, and you were done. And that went on through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Then in the 80s, we got personal computers because all this development work was done in-house. There was no, you couldn't buy packages like you can today. It's unthinkable, this world of yesterday, but that's how it was done. But then the IT departments couldn't keep up with the demand of the users. And so when the PCs arrived, they had packages available to them, like what would be Excel today. Think of that. Word. There was a huge then change in terms of productivity, and this thing went on through various technological iterations, and gradually during the 80s and early 90s, some people were saying, well, look, we've got all this data created by these operational transactional systems. Isn't that valuable for like thinking about how we might analyze what we're doing as a company, let's say, and understanding our customers' behavior? And that was initially thought of as like a pipe dream. It was like ridiculous. But then in the 1990s, we had the advent of data or maybe a bit earlier, and the mainstream, at least in the 90s, of data warehousing, where the business suddenly said, yes, data is a valuable resource. We can do things with it, and that was where data centricity started to come in, because you're doing things like Kimball's design methodology with star schemas, where you're organizing the data to match query families. You're not doing it to optimize the reduction of update errors, which would be the third normal form approach. So, which was oriented to operational processes. So this then happened, and then of course we had 9/11, and the Nasdaq bubble blew up, and then there was like a dark age for 5 years until 2005, by which time people had found that yes, you can have data warehouses and things like that, but it's all going wrong. They're failing, and the technology enables us to do things like ETL, let's say, But the technology, because we can do these new things, new problems have emerged, and these new problems are connected with the data. The technology itself doesn't solve them. It actually creates them. We have to manage them. And after billions of dollars being spent, people figured out it's the data, we need to do something about it. So now the focus came in and we had data governance. So that's kind of a brief little history of what went on, how we got to the point today where data is the most important resource in the economy, and we need to govern and manage it properly.
Oh, wow. That was like in one statement, the entire history of data in the last few decades.
Yeah.
And even the confrontation between, or let's say this historical divide, as you call it, between IT and business, you say that, so cleanly, like how did this came up when the business and IT never have a common language? I love it.
No, it was there from the very beginning.
And it sounds to me that a lot of problems are still there today. So I don't think that a lot of these have been truly solved. I mean, it's almost like, a design error from the beginning that had, in which we're doing symptom treatment.
Right.
On the way.
Right. It's actually got worse because we have accreting layers of technology. So organizations typically can't get rid of certain, parts of the technological infrastructure they have. Like you'll still see old mainframes running, systems from decades ago in some companies. That happens. And so those systems can't be changed to do things like improve data quality or reduce, for new uses of data. So it's actually kind of getting more and more difficult. That's why new companies have less issues, because they don't have, these problems to deal with. They can start with with today's technology, but they're really building the legacy systems of the future. That's what's going to happen. It'll happen to them eventually too, because they're not looking after these problems. They just don't have them when they start out.
So I'm just thinking, so the problem kind of statement is to a large degree still a problem statement that is valid today. That is, would you agree with that statement? And most organizations, would be still the problem statement.
Yeah, I think so. The problem statement has actually got worse because think about, 2016, we had the GDPR. At least it was, started to appear, and then I think it was May 2018 when it was actually implemented. It went live. So there we got there was data privacy issues, or people who did data privacy long before that. But then it kind of went mainstream. So now, in addition to all your other problems, you've got to deal with data privacy. So there's a new thing that we've got to deal with, and we've got data, but if we want to get a usage out of data, we have to understand it, know the semantics of it, and we have to trust it. Now, in the container of the old operational system, which was a silo built for a single use, everything works in there, but it's kind of like, it's like kind of plasma contained in a magnetic bottle. Once you take the data out of that environment, all the code that constrains it and makes it makes it satisfy the operational needs of that system, all that comes off. All you've got is pure data now. So how are you going to reuse it? Because the workarounds that were embedded in code are no longer there, and so you get all these you got idiosyncratic aspects of the design you have to understand to use it properly, and you've got data errors in the original code which didn't matter in the operational system, but do where you're in the context of what you're trying to use. So I'll give you an example. So one system I worked on for asset-backed securitization of mortgages, we got the information about the loans from a loan servicing system, where the most important thing was mailing address. Where do you send the bill for people to pay their mortgages? Okay. There was also a field called for the US state of residence, where the individual was actually a resident, irrespective of where their home was. That was not important to the loan servicing system, but for the asset-backed securitization system, it was very important because you have to make sure you don't have over concentration in terms of the state of residence. And it was like super bad data quality. It was like full of nulls and didn't work. But that's, you know, so what's important, not important in one context can be important in another. It's not like data is sort of scientifically, you know, kind of like just good. It's dependent on how it's managed.
Well, I guess one thing that did happen in the last, I would say 10, 15 years is that you actually start to see a lot of data teams being there in companies. And so, I mean, both Alexis and I manage data teams in large companies, and Alexis, you're nodding. Do you think, you know, data teams have managed to become this in between IT and business to start, you know, navigating and finding solutions to making data more reusable across? Did you see that happening with, you know, with running a data team that runs between, you know, tech and business?
Yeah, I think that's the natural evolution or part of it. So the data team has to understand, you know, the technologies they're working with, you know, the modern data stack. So you can think about things like, you know, Python, Airflow, DBT, etc. So be able to work with those tools, but you still have to understand the data. And the problem, you see, going back again in time, when you were automating a manual process, the thing you started was the manual process, okay, which you could ask somebody because they lived it every day. They did it manually. They could explain it to you. Now, the starting point of the data-centric projects is already existing production data, but people don't know. You can't ask a user about that because they don't really know the details. They can't see it there. You know, they live on the other side of screens. They see the interfaces. They don't see into the database. So that's why we spend, you know, a huge amount of time on source data analysis and so on. So I think data analysts in data teams are very important to do that work. But if the business itself is able to use those tools and the business itself is able to analyze and come to do their own understanding of data, you'll see the migration shift even more into the business and away from IT.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I totally see this resonating. You know, I was telling always my role in the company was as a leader of a data team to build the bridges, right? Like the bridge between what business see in the data versus like what data teams see in the data. And what I'm interested in is that as we were in the early stage building those bridges, and people seeing data differently, there was that super often question like, who owns this? Right? Like, who owns CRM data, let's say? How did your experience this through? You know, I mean, I know the canonical answer on this, which we kind of experience nowadays, but how did you found, you know, this question of ownership? So we have these data teams, we have a business, but who is in that ownership position with the data?
And the IT team often. And the IT teams as well, and the source system.
Yeah. So I promise the word owner, because if I own the data, that means I could take it and sell it to somebody else. It means I have legal title to it. So in America, I think they use the word owner because they want to say somebody is accountable for something when the poor person doesn't know what being accountable is, because you can't tell that person, okay, you're the owner, that means you have to do A, B, C, and D, but not in vague generalities like if the data quality is wrong, you're to blame. It's like, well, what do I do to, you know, in great detail to do that? So it's like, we can't explain the detailed tasks to these people, but we just call them owners. So that's one thing. Secondly, there are stakeholders, there are people with different interests in data. And if you designate, oh, it has to have one owner because we have to have one neck to choke, well, then these other people get upset because they feel they have, you know, that they have some stake in this for what they do, but they're not an owner and therefore they don't control anything. So better way of thinking about this is sort of through a 𝗖𝗍 matrix, where you think about the different people or units involved and the very detailed tasks involved in or sets of responsibilities for data. And I mean, you can have, for instance, a decision maker about data who's like the boss of a silo, but that person may not have the intimate detailed knowledge that a subject matter expert of that data will have. Okay. And subject matter expert is not a job title. It's like being a village elder. It's some kind of mark of esteem, that people earn. So it's a very complex area, culturally, sort of sociologically.
So maybe that's a good segue to what you've been doing in the last few years, which is like helping companies to set up data governance.
Right.
And so my question here would be, which of these problems that you described can data governance solve realistically?
Okay, so I think we can take a shot at solving some of them. However, we have to be careful with data governance. What's happened to a lot of data governance units is that they become platform administrators for data catalogs. So they've lost the connection to the business side, really, or the bigger picture. Because yes, I'm all in favor. You need metadata management tools. We need that. But that when all you do is, it all becomes about the tool and how you administer that tool, then you kind of lost the plot, I think. So what I think is important for data governance is to think about how it sits in the organization. I worked at the United Nations for a long time, and I was always kind of interested when they would talk about line ministries, and that governance, was one of the things that they put a lot of money into. They would talk about line ministries and coordinating ministries in governmental organization. So I think that data governance has to play a strong coordination role, because if you think about it, you've got people like legal who have an opinion on data in terms of, let's say, the contractual aspects of licensed data we buy from data vendors. Procurement also gets involved in that. And, we don't want atypical terms about data in our data contracts. But procurement aren't data experts. We've got the chief, privacy officer, although sometimes privacy is within legal. Many times it's within legal. Sometimes it's a separate organization. That gets involved with data, obviously. You've got enterprise architecture who's thinking about the set of data stores across the enterprise and how they'll talk to each other, and so on and so on and so forth. So they're all doing their own things in their own silos. Data governance needs to establish a sort of horizontal link, like across all of these, to partner with them for when it comes to the governance and important management aspects of data that they are not experts in. Okay, data governance isn't ever going to be, hopefully, experts in law, like the legal department. But the legal department aren't experts in data management or data governance either. So it's kind of, you need both. And data governance has to perform this coordination. Okay, so I think that's super important.
Yeah, and as you said, most of the time that doesn't happen, and data governance does something else. And I just was wondering, because this is not an exception. The rule is that they do something else than what you describe. And why is that?
Because the models we have in the literature, I don't think are really attuned to real world needs. So if you are data governance and you say, okay, here we are, what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to make all these people data owners. It's like they're sitting there quite happily, and now you come in and say, oh, you're a data owner. It's like, what? And what does that mean? Well, it means you have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Well, just a minute. You're not HR. You're not my boss. Who are you to tell me what to do? Now, they don't say that, but they think it. Okay. It's like, okay, I'll put up with these people, and see if they go away. And, but if they don't, and they start saying, they start bothering me, I'm going to complain to my boss because I'm already working 110%. and you can't just come in through, because you're kind of a dysfunctional tech person and just tell me like what I've got to do with my job here, my role, and it creates problems. That's why you see what happens then is they complain upwards and it goes across and comes down on top of data governance. That's why you see so many data governance initiatives are eliminated, but they have to restart a few years later. Yeah.
Being flushed out of the system.
But they have to restart
as something that is just bothering the business to do their business.
Right, but the problems are still there with the data. There's a genuine need for data governance.
And I think that leads to data governance often being the ones that do their quiet work and their catalog and metadata. So nobody's bothered and they stick along for several years.
That's right.
But the promises are still there.
They build what I call the museum of metadata. So they've got this data catalog full of metadata, which is kind of like, the archives of a museum that the general public doesn't see. And it's all carefully curated, but nobody uses it.
I have a question then on the successful examples of the data governance, right? So those which do not become a museum. What do you think about the skill set there? And I'm asking this, like what that skill set would be with the data governance people would make them successful. I've experienced a little bit in my life before a kind of a communication and that almost like a salesperson personality, which made possible to sell that efforts, what you just said, without resistance to the people, convincing them that it makes sense, it's a great deal. Just do it. What's your experience on this? Like, how do you see that skill set?
I think every data governance unit needs a communication specialist. And then the problem is, it is then perceived as a sales specialist. It is not. It's like, if you're going to, if you try, there's a lot of people in business units who've heard of, say, a data lake. They have no idea what a data lake is. Okay, it's never been explained to them. I remember when I heard it first, it's like, it's come and work on this data lake. And it's like, well, what are they talking about? And then I realized I'd actually worked on a massive data lake project in the past. We just didn't use that term. Okay, we called it ultra large scale data. So you need people who can communicate out to because data governance is horizontal. It's like human resources. It covers everybody, okay, in the organization. So you've got to explain to them that data can't be really touched, felt. It can be visualized, but the data it can't be kind of seen in a database. It can only be conceptualized. So it's difficult. These concepts are difficult for people, and they tend to think, oh, it's just technology like my cell phone, but it's not. It's different. So there's lots of misconceptions and gaps in understanding about data. So and then you have to, because you're doing a lot of things in data governance, like, again, data privacy, data quality, data issue management, managing, license data. You can't have little bits of data governance doing their own communication and confusing the heck out of people. You've got to have that coordinated as well. So it's a lot more than selling. So I think, but data governance does have to make its mission clear to the organization, and it does have to have a value proposition where people can see, yes, it is bringing benefits, and you need leadership as well, because ultimately data is everyone's responsibility. We all have personal responsibility for data. It's part of what we do in the modern economy. So people have to get their heads around that and do things like understand, well, I'm a new joiner, okay, to an organization. What do I do? Well, it's to a large extent, it's what's the data that I have to work with? Can somebody explain that to me, please? And that's not happening. And it takes a long time for new joiners to get up to speed and be productive because we're not doing that. So there's a lot of elements like that in successful data governance organizations that are, those elements are properly addressed, and communications or organizational change management plays a big role in that.
I'm wondering, when you say it's everyone's business, yeah, of course. But that is, at the same time, I see kind of what we saw in Data Masterclass is that the number one root cause for failing data governance programs, in our point of view, is, or in our experience, is actually that you have a too wide scope that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to solve everything at once without prioritization, then you have no chance. Because I mean, if you like, let's say you have a team of 5 data governance people, and that's already luxurious. Yeah. And you have an organization of 100,000 people with like 1,000 source systems. Good luck with that, making data everyone's business, in the first year.
Well,
but that seems to be the expectation of the leadership when they hire these 5 people, because 5 people, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Of, to put into this topic.
That's right. It seems to be that way. So this is a big question. How do you leverage data governance units that are, centralized units with just a few people into the whole organization? Well, one way is policies, and unfortunately, data governance units don't understand policy processes, which is why I recently wrote a book on how to do policies. And they're not very good at the content of those policies either. They don't understand. But with a policy, you can have leverage across the entire organization with just a very few people at the center. And policies are like the law of the organization. People will follow them. But it's a double-edged tool. They must be absolutely rock solid, and they can't be something you just do over a weekend. And you have to understand how to develop a policy and what the policy life cycle is. That's super important. So that's one way. The second way that you can get the leverage from the 5 people is through a champion network, which is usually, it goes back to what people call data stewards, which is, unfortunately, the data steward idea becomes, okay, here's this, you're a data steward, so now you have all these big set of responsibilities. I think it's better to think of them more like a shop steward in a union. Okay, so the union in a particular part of a company will have a shops. I'm not advocating unions. I'm just using an example. Okay, I'm neutral, but this is how it's supposed to work. They have
you're talking with a European
I know
organization.
I know that you have workers' councils and things like that, but it's kind of like that. You have somebody in there who's able to understand, see the world in terms of the union. So we need data stewards who the center can communicate with more effectively, and they can spread the word inside they're like a political officer for data governance inside wherever they work. Okay. And treat them as a communication thing, not as somebody who has, again, an ever increasing load of responsibilities, and they will help to spread good data management, good data governance practices in their areas, and they will push back to the center like problems and issues they see, because they're going to be trained more by data governance and become more aware of what the needs are for data governance and data management. That's kind of the way I see it.
Yes. I was just thinking, so what often happens with these steward roles is, what I've seen happening is that they are kind of getting misused to do the metadata thing that you described earlier, to work on things that are sometimes completely meaningless to anyone, and they don't understand why they're doing it, and over time,
it's very dystopian.
Kind of give up or have given up in the beginning, and
it's like, it's they don't understand why they're doing that, what it is, and it's kind of meaningless to them. It just gets in the way of their regular work. What are we going to do with all this metadata? Who's going to use it for what? And it's just not clear. I think we have to be focused on things that will bring some kind of benefit to these people. And I do think that they do feel that they personally benefit when they're trained in, again, good data management practices. It's helpful, but not like just having this giant organizational structure. I mean, this goes back to the initial model of data governance, which was, developed around 2005, and I'm not sure it fits the modern age.
So Malcolm, tell us, how would you today, or how are you approaching it? So when you're helping a company to navigate this, and you've done that many times, what's the top 3 things that you would start with and focus on? And I'm sure this is very different to the classical approach based on the conversation so far. So enlighten us, or also refresh us, because I think we need a refresher. Because I think we are, like a lot of companies have been stuck here.
Yeah, well, first of all, look at the strategic business objectives of the company. What are they trying to do? Okay. And then how does data help that? Okay. So that's one thing. That's got to inform your vision, mission, and priorities. You then look at the components of data governance. Like, you have to have a data governance framework which has all the enablers, services, practice areas, bits and pieces, components and services of data governance. Then you figure out, well, which one of these do we need? It can't be everything. Okay, so you can prioritize. Then you need to set up this communication/training function, because you're going to have to decide, what you're going to have to communicate. You're going to have to train people. And then the operational model, the operating model, which would be not, yes, we have to have centralization because you have to have data specialists. Data is it's kind of a science. There are data specialists. It's not something a generalist can do. So we're going to set that up. But then how do you interact with all these other organizational units in the business in a partnership mode so that you can achieve this coordination amongst them? So you can sit at the architectural review board and say, okay, you've got a new project. Have you thought about this? Are you using the best data source? Have you got licensed data in this that, maybe we're, violating the terms of the contract? How are you, designing for privacy? Have you got the reference data you need for all these kind of things? Going from that to talking to legal about, okay, what are the issues we're seeing with data? How do we need to, from a legal aspect, do better data management and get people more up to speed on that? All of these, so the operating model like that is super important, and going out and becoming, true partners with all these other functions in the organization, rather than saying, oh yeah, we got to get a data catalog, so let's do that, and then we'll all sit in the corner with our backs to the world and play around with the contents of our data catalog.
So what do you think would be a good, or what is a good win, like in a quarter or two, what could be a win where you say, hey, now we have something that we didn't have before that is meaningful also to the business leadership? Right.
So I think what you can do is, going back to what we were talking about in terms of ownership, is where you got, sorry, let me back up. There's a better one today. What's happened now with the cloud is that we've gone back to essentially the 1960s, where suddenly what we used to be called data administration becomes important, because just as with the mainframe, storage and compute have to be paid for. Okay, it's not like you have a data center and you can just scale up until you reach some limit. So getting rid of unused data, pruning back unused data, reducing storage, reducing compute costs, that will drive operational efficiency in terms of data management. That's a big win for people, because those costs are just going up and to the right, especially as AI consumes more electricity. And, this is a very big bone of contention, of course, the energy stuff. But it is true that data is starting to get equated to energy. Okay. And there's a tremendous cost in that. So that kind of management will bring bottom line benefits to organizations that are tangible.
So that's actually, that was surprising to me, by the way. So basically what you said is you're gonna, like, one of the great wins you can create early on is actually to reduce the data costs, basically. I was thinking, hey, you can improve a few data sets maybe that are super critical, or where you have the problem, like the problem that you described before, that one department needs the data of the other department, it's crap, and it kind of hits the targets heavily of the other department. The other department doesn't care because it's not their problem. And if you resolve one or two of these, you make at least, 2 or 3 very powerful people very happy, plus you create a lot of benefits. It's interesting that you're saying data cost. I think it could be smart. It's just not something I anticipated.
That was a focus, again, many, many years ago in data. Now it's come back. If you want to do something quickly and sort of effectively, that would be a way, I think, to go.
Very good. So I'm just looking at our list of things we pre-discussed, and I'm thinking one thing that we haven't discussed yet is the shift to unstructured data. How's that, changing the game?
Right.
From your perspective?
So unfortunately, going back to 1970, when 𝗏 came out with, the relational theory and the normal, third normal and higher normal forms, we've been focused on relational database and structured data, which is fine. I mean, I think that absolutely had to be the focus. But what got left behind was especially after the PC revolution, we had all these unstructured files like, Word, Excel is kind of, that's in its own beast in the, end user computing area, let's put that to the side for the minute, and so on. So emails, things like that. So there are organizations that run on processing documents. Okay. They deal with, especially if they're heavily involved with contracts, things like that, legal kind of financial matters, deals. For them, unstructured data is the main thing that they're actually interested in. So there's a big area of the economy that actually has to deal with unstructured data, and we're not doing very well with it. Yes, we have, and then everybody else, they don't know what they have, they don't know how to find it, they create copies of it. How do you deal with the metadata? Well, you change the names and say this is the document such and such final maybe 2025 /2026. And like, what is that? So our metadata management capabilities around unstructured data are hopeless, basically. So all of that is leading to, people are spending a huge amount of time looking for things. I can't remember where I store things. The only thing we have is the names of files, the names of folders, and the directory structure, which is hierarchical. And it's like you have to navigate, down. Oh, it's not there. Okay, back up. Let's go down here. It's like, this is totally ridiculous in this day and age. So we need to improve that. Okay, so that's a huge win, by the way, if people can do that. And I've been working with it. And the technical capabilities or technological capabilities are better today. So you stand a chance of doing it. Now, you then have the issue, which I noticed over the years. Okay, we've got unstructured data. Unstructured data becomes valuable, and this is now really accelerated with AI, when you can turn it into structured data. Okay, so you can process unstructured data, and before it was stupid things like keyword searches, and you can turn it into structured data. And those data sets are very valuable, and that's what you use for analytics. Okay, the data team uses them. So that's another area in which, okay, how do I process unstructured data to extract things from it? Like you can imagine like, reports about the economy or analyst reports or something like that about a company. And you have, okay, here's a few data elements that I need to get out of that. Okay, AI, go do that for me and build this for me. But you have to check it so that, all of the problems you can see there, but that's when it becomes valuable. So that going from unstructured to structured is a very big challenge right now that's very valuable if you can do that.
Right. And I I think the last topic that I want to bring up is, we started off with going from process centricity to data centricity, and we acknowledge that most companies have not reached data centricity yet. What is kind of your number one thing you would think of that can help companies to shift to see real data as a category on its own rather than a side thing?
Right. Yeah, some companies do that. If you're a data vendor, that your data is your business. In finance and pharma, a few things like that, they have to be more data. I mean, finance has no material products, so they're more attuned to it. But still, it's still as you say. So I think it's cultural. I think we haven't really addressed the people aren't taught about it. Again, they equate data equals technology, and that's unfortunately not the case. There are problems in data that aren't addressed just by technology alone. So it's that cultural aspect of it, and making sure that is broadly spread across the enterprise, so that it does become eccentric. You build a data culture. It doesn't have to be overwhelming, but something that's sufficient to meet the needs of the enterprise.
So I guess everyone would say, yeah, data culture is great, but I mean, it's also like it's kind of also the problem statement, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, how do you do
it? Because it's not so easy to change any culture.
No. So persistence is, I'm not sure this is politically correct, but many years ago, I went to a lecture by the gentleman who invented the 𝗪𝗏 cowboy, Marlboro cigarettes, which up to that point had been the single most successful advertising campaign in US history. And he said, the only thing that matters is persistence. So he said, you've got to craft your message, and then you have to endlessly repeat it. You have to be persistent, but you can't change the message. Okay. You have to know what you want. You have to be very, very clear in terms of, again, it comes back to this aspect of communications, organizational change management. That part of data governance has to be there, and it has to be finding all the different ways to do this. It's not a project, and that's another thing. It's like we'll do a project and we'll conceive of it as a campaign. It'll last 3 months and we're done. It doesn't work that way. It'll never happen if you do that.
So what would be the first thing or the biggest thing that comes into your mind of things you learned on the way, which you wished to knew earlier, which came far too late as a realization when you approach data governance?
Right. I think that the data privacy would be one of them, because I actually got exposed to that in 2004 because my neighbor happened to be like one of the very few experts on data. I don't know why, he just happened like data privacy. I never heard of it before. And he tried to explain to me what it was. And it was, I got some of it, but not enough. And then, again, it became more important after 2015, 2016. So that was something but again, had I known it, it would have been difficult to explain to other people. They didn't see it as that important. So that's one thing. Let's see what else. Sort of understanding these issues about structured data, because we had structured data with us forever. Unstructured data, with us forever. And just not focusing enough on that and understanding the unique management and governance issues around unstructured data, I think, is something that I wish I'd done earlier.
Great. Alexei, is there anything from you that you have done?
I have one question which I cannot resist to ask. So we started this call when you said that data is largest economical asset actually in the world. And then in the end of the call, we touched a little bit about this, how can we transform that feeling of the data being a true economic asset, right? Like something which we can put a number against. And I'm super interested in your view on this. Like, when we think about the companies who owns the data, it's just like another asset. It's physical asset. There are physical assets in the company which either depreciates or they grow in value. Can we do something with data, or with the people motivation, or with the leadership, to make data as tangible as with physical assets today in the company. So it's really being seen as either your accelerator of the business growth in the relation of the company, or if you don't do anything with this, then it's depreciates and it's kind of drags it down.
That's right. So unfortunately, data has no scrap value. Okay, so you can't like take data to a scrapyard and recycle it and at least sell it for its scrap value. Like, you know, scrap steel is about $270 a metric ton. Okay, so that is a problem. And so data is not a material input. So where do we get the value from? It's from utilizing it. Okay, so it's usage dependent. If it just sits there and nothing happens with it, it has no value. It's only valuable in terms of the output it produces. Therefore, I think it's difficult to manage. And again, there are thinkers like John Ladley who do actually go into this in quite some detail about how you might be able to account for data, which I do think that that's correct. There is a way, there must be some value in it, but it's based on usage and the outputs it's producing. Okay, if that changes, its value is less, at least. It's not the same. So it's got to be something like that in terms of how we value it. And that then could be used to think about the investment you need to manage it and govern it. Okay, it could, and obviously data is also an industry, so people are selling data. So it does inherently have some value on some level, but not all data is like that. It's probably some kind of, curve that comes down like this, where there's some data that is undisputably of high value. And then there's a lot of it that you have to struggle to figure out if it really has any value at all.
Well, not everything in the physical world has equal value. I mean, there are diamonds and there's, I don't know, waste.
Yeah.
Like things, waste.
Waste.
Both are physical.
Waste or something like that, which is, you can't do much with it. So yeah, that's right.
Good. Yeah.
Great. I think this was a wonderful discussion. I think we touched so many things. We looked through the history of data and data governance and touched some of the, I would say, key problems that we have until today in data governance and managing data. And also maybe some first kind of, inspirations on what to look out for to solve them. And we all know it's tough, but it's also, I mean, we all probably seen some breakthroughs here and there where something magical happened. So thank you so much for being with us, Malcolm. And it's been a great episode with you. And a pleasure to talk and discuss and learn from your experiences.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Alexis. This has been good. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. It was wonderful to have this with you.